Joshua received specific tactical instructions from the Lord. First, God assured Joshua of success. I've handed it over to you. The victory was already won. Well, the people obviously would have been terrified in Jericho. Here, this is the people of God that God had parted the river for them. Second, God gave Joshua some unusual instructions. This would not be the typical siege of a well-fortified city. Instead of attacking the city by building siege works or by attempting to knock through the gate, God's people were simply to march around the city in silence behind a procession of 7 priests with trumpets leading the Ark of the Covenant for 6 consecutive days. And that silence part was a very important part of it too. Instead of a battle plan, Joshua received a liturgy. On the 7th day, they would march around Jericho 7 times. At that time, the priest would sound a long blast with a ram's horn, and all God's people were to shout. Jericho's great wall would come crashing down so that they could charge into the city. There was no sophisticated battle plan. The victory would be God-given and conducted in a way that would bring glory and honor to the Lord rather than to the military prowess of Joshua and Israel. In obedience to God, Joshua instructed the priests to prepare to lead a processional before the ark of the Lord. Joshua then ordered God's people to march around the city before the ark. Our text moves from the commandment of God to implementation by God's people. God's instructions were followed by faithful obedience. As we saw in Lesson 2, faithful obedience was the key virtue that Israel was to embody. I think that may be a part that we have a little trouble with sometimes, is our faithful obedience. Okay, would somebody read the second paragraph there in the verses 12 through 14? Thank you.
12 through 14.
Yes, please.
Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord passed on, blowing the trumpets continually. The armed men went before them, and the rear guard came after the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets blew continually. On the 2nd day they marched around the city once, and then returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days.
Okay, for 6 days they marched in this silence, and they completed 1 rotation around the city and then returned to camp.
But it wasn't totally silent, was it, with those horns?
No, but the people weren't saying anything, at least.
Yeah. My neighbor got up at 5:30 and started mowing the lawn.
There's a no about the loud.
Been a naughty girl.
So you can see, oh, we were gone. Must have been a long ago thing, huh?
But think about what this must have done, besides the fact that the people of Jericho were upset because of the river crossing thing. They must have wondered what these Israelites were up to. So our text does not report on what the people of Jericho were doing, but the warriors posted on its walls must have been hurling insults and launching arrows at God's people. And yet, each day, for 6 straight days, the Israelites marched around the city in silence, except for the people blowing the ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. So, on we go. Would somebody go ahead and read then 15 through 17?
On the 7th day they rose early at dawn and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priest had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city."
Okay, So our text takes its decisive turn on the seventh day. And the seventh day is the Sabbath. And if you recall, we talked about the manna. They never were asked to work. In fact, they were to avoid work on the seventh day. They were to gather manna on the seventh day. They were to gather enough on the sixth day to last for that. And so this is very surprising that on the Sabbath they were asked to do something. On the Sabbath, Israel was to cease all work as a testimony to the Lord, who rested on the seventh day of creation. And he had delivered Israel from slavery. It's fitting that God delivered Jericho to Israel on the Sabbath, since the victory was the result of the work of God rather than the efforts of the Israelites. All Israel had to do was show up and obey God's commands. On the seventh day, God's people followed God's commands to perfection. Now would somebody read 17 through 20?
The city and all that is in it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who were with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers we sent. As for you, keep away from the things devoted to destruction, so as not to covet and take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel an object for destruction, bringing trouble upon it. But all silver and gold and vessels of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sounds of the trumpets, they raised a great shout, and the wall fell down flat.
Okay, because the victory was God's, Israel was not to act in the fashion of other marauding armies. Israel was different. Jericho belonged to God, and God won the victory. Instead of looting and pillaging Jericho, Israel was commanded to devote the entire city and its inhabitants to the Lord. And this is the part that I think is a little hard to get. It was to be leveled and completely destroyed. This sounds very harsh, and Cliff, I know, talked about why was there so much violence in this first lesson. Some of the Canaanites were to be spared, Rahab and her family. And this was significant because Rahab and her family alone survived the destruction of Jericho, because Rahab recognized the power and glory of God and aligned herself with God's purposes by helping the spies that Joshua had sent. And then in verses 18 and 19, it gives some rationale for the command to destroy utterly Jericho and its inhabitants. Joshua had warned the Israelites to keep away from the people and the material possessions of Jericho. Both of these existed as a temptation to apostasy for God's people. Well, I had to look that word up. I don't know what that means, but I found it. It means an abandoning of something that one once believed in as a faith. And so one of the things that it asks about in our students' book is, do we trust God for the victory? Or what do we place our trust in? Is it our bank account? Is it our personal abilities? Our military might? What do you think? Our debt ceiling? Because that was on the paper, in the paper today. Where does our security rest?
I'm going to come way out of left field as usual. I'm always thinking of the underdog. But the people, the inside Jericho, were made by God too. And I keep wondering, has our leader seen a messenger of God? Could we be the people inside Jericho? It makes me wonder about those people. maybe their lifestyle wasn't so good. It also makes me wonder if so many people are hiding with Rahab and her kind, thinking they're gonna be saved, whereas the rest of us are saying, But, you know, I guess we need to devote ourselves to that's pleasing to God, or we might be on the inside of Jericho, not the outside.